welcome to yet another session of Financial Fridays. I'm Venkatesh from MoveMe, a boutique agency focused on shared mobility architecture. Basically, at MoveMe, we design, build, plan shared mobility services such as car sharing, micromobility, also integrating those into public transit. We have done about 60 projects so far in the last 6+ years, and I'm very excited to discuss some nitty-gritty operational stuff, which is usually super critical, but at the same time, many times neglected, but very critical for financial feasibility for any operator. We did like a previous session, which we overall talked about supply and demand for shared mobility. And here I have two experts from the industry of EVs, car sharing, EV charging, to talk about what goes in and what comes out. Through Financial Fridays, we bring in a hot mobility topic every month, and we try to go into the deep understanding of that, and hopefully we are able to help out our network in understanding what the experts think. We talk about teams, we will talk about operations management and the people behind the scenes. And as a bonus, we also have EV fleet management, as something that we can add on to today's topic. So I'm very happy to welcome Kameale Terry, who's an expert in workforce development and EVs. Kameale, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Kameale is the CEO and founder of ChargerHelp, and we also are joined by Nicholas Hill, who brings loads of experience from operations from the car sharing industry. Welcome, Nick.
Hey, thanks for having me as well. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining. Let's dive right into it then. So one of the first things that I wanted to check was on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being very high, where would you place operations planning and implementation as a priority when it comes to like shared mobility and EV business? And why would you do that? Why would you rate it at what you do? Kameale, let's start with you.
Yeah, I would definitely put it at a 5, mainly because everything we're doing, it's infrastructure, it's project management, it's construction. Even though we're introducing software and technology of the future, at the core, we're still building stuff, and we're also hoping that we build it in such a way that people will use it and that it'll be accessible. But at the core, right, it's still a lot of building up infrastructure. So, managing that on an operational scale it's mission critical.
And Nick, what do you like to add to that from your side on the rating part?
Yeah, I don't think it would be a fun conversation if I didn't have a different answer. And I think there's different places depending on what you're launching, right? So in 2011, I was part of the first all-electric car share launch in San Diego, California for a Daimler venture called Car2Go. And in that instance, the city had promised something like 1,000 publicly available charging stations, level 2 at this time, within our home area. And at launch, there were something like 24. And we had 400 EV smart cars that we were reliant on this public infrastructure. So there's one where I would agree that operational planning should have been put near the top of that list and would be a 5. I think generally, though, and this is where I'll be the contrarian, is probably a 2 or a 3, right? Like to me, the product and tech is planning, and you want to define your product first, and that's kind of the initial must-have for a launch. That's the baseline, right? Like I'm a runner. I've run over 500 days in a row. Every day I get up and run, and what matters to start that run is that I have a right shoe and a left shoe. I have some clothes. I have a watch, right? And that's, to me, like product and tech. That's the foundation. And then the actual doing is kind of after that, right? Like the running is the most important part, just like the operations is the most important part. And I need to provide tactical feedback to myself about what I did and what was successful and what was not successful. But that's more after the fact to me, right? I think it's okay to go in with a less defined operations plan, to listen to your customer, and ultimately have a feedback loop or a wheel that is allowing that feedback to drive user stories that are ultimately influencing product and tech. I don't necessarily think you can define operations from scratch prior to launch, right? I think that's a post-launch exercise, and more emphasis should be put on product and tech, on really defining what you want, who your customer is, and then how you're going to drive towards that goal with your customer, first and foremost, and then figure out the user stories and the operations and that strategic planning and that flywheel on the back end.
Okay, yeah, because I wanted to press on with Nick because I was like, you sound like my engineers, Nick, and people that didn't have to deal with the maintenance after this little feedback loop didn't happen. So this is where, and I think like this is the issue, at least what I've seen within clean technology, is that we adapt, we're anti-waterfall, so we're like anti like traditional project management, and we're in this sprint. However, like sprints to me and those type of products are made for like software, right? And what we're doing with EV infrastructure and even just mobility, like it is tied to hardware and infrastructure. And I don't necessarily think that waterfall is like the best way to go about it, because to your point, Nick, it does take longer to get that feedback. However, from my experience with building our infrastructure, we, at least within the EVSC side, we missed the mark when it came to doing our due diligence before we started creating product. And an example of that, right, is that the first batch of charging stations that were deployed, there was no industry-wide standard in regards to how you measure cell phone signal. Why is this important? The stations are smart. The stations, most of them actually have SIM cards in them. I've seen a T-Mobile SIM card inside of plenty of stations. But then they'll put this little T-Mobile SIM card station, my product folks, they're like, oh, it's a good design, it's great software. I'm just going to throw it maybe in New York State parks. That has no service, right? But if we would have taken a step back and said, hey, we're doing infrastructure and product, what can I do to ensure that my product is going to be able to work in the New York State parks that has no service? That would have saved, a lot of headaches. So I think that within clean technology, we're going to have to figure out a way. Because to your point, Nick, like waterfall takes way too long for feedback. You will never get the feedback you need in order to do product. However, doing the sprints and an agile framework is too fast, and it doesn't take into account the actual physical assets that we're putting in the ground and that we're now responsible for.
Yeah,
no, I'm just kidding.
No, it's a great point, and you're talking to someone that's a stone's throw from probably one of those New York State parks that does not have cell service, in which you launched in Harriman, and I get it. Like I don't get great cell service at my house, and that would have been a great thing for defining when you were building out strategy through your product team, through your strategy team with customer, right? And I think it's okay to have operators be the tip of the spear. And I'm being, again, contrarian a little bit to have a bit of a debate, but like I do think there's a bit too much value placed on the thought process of the folks that are out in the field, moving the cars around or thinking every day about a customer issue rather than being the customer themselves. And that's what I like to try to flip when we're thinking about operational planning and deciding whether we should bias toward action or bias towards, getting as much feedback prior to launch as we can. And so flipping that, the process of operations planning and implementation from operator feedback to customer feedback, I think is going to be important in defining a better product in the long run, and then leaning on operators to package that feedback up post-launch is going to ultimately get you where you want to go a little bit quicker.
I think that with new products and new industries, you have to rely on the expert. And then once some things are established, I think then, of course, like go to the EV driver, because to your point, there's apps and things that have been created today that EV drivers don't care about. Like that people just you either want your charging experience to be an experience you don't remember because it was just so easy peasy, or you want it to be extraordinary. You want it to feel like the future. And today it's it can be the opposite of both those things for a lot of people because I feel like we didn't have initial experts to uncover some of these issues that we're now seeing.
maybe it might not be enough for us to, simulate every single scenario. It might not be possible, and definitely that is something that has to come back. But to Nick's point, the feedback has to be faster, and I think that's where the operations team, I'm sure Kameale, you agree to this, that operations people should have like that priority, like, hey, this is what we think this is what we are bringing in from the customer side, and this is what it should work, and this is what they want, and they are the ones who we are trying to serve. So let's get something working, right? So that way it makes sense. At the same time, I want to draw this attention towards infrastructure, EVs. Yes, there is something which is going on. It could be a little bit of an outlier right now, but when we talk about the entire thing, and this question is to you, Nick. So, for example, if you're not setting up a new service, which is totally new, it's not an EV car share, which even today is new, but it's like a bike share. If it is a traditional car share or any other operation, which is just like almost like a copy and paste from another city, how does the operations planning work there, and how does that impact the first year in financials?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I'll give a specific example, right? Like if you're looking at a market, Vancouver is a good example where for free-floating car sharing, much of the infrastructure was in parking garages, right? Like there were some on-street capabilities, and I've been out of the Vancouver business for a while, but most of it was municipal parking garages. Toronto is the same. If you look at cities like DC would be another example where there's lots of off-street parking in the States. And if you were to go and think just very high level about things that have worked in other cities, you may look at something like keyless access, and you say, look, this makes a ton of sense. It saves us operational costs from lost keys. It's a better customer experience. Folks appreciate the ability. It feels futuristic to use an app, but without also integrating some type of Bluetooth Low Energy or other way to access that app other than a GSM network, you have totally blown it in Vancouver, right? You have totally blown it in Toronto or DC or some of these other cities, whereas in a Portland or maybe to a lesser extent a Seattle, it's not really necessary, right? And so while you can copy and paste somewhat, I think maybe that is where, and I'll be a little less contrarian, you need these experts that have experience from these cities that are able to step in and say, look, maybe you do want to launch without an RFID card or without a key altogether, but you're going to have to make sure that you have that Bluetooth Low Energy thing locked and figured out. Elsewise, you're going to have some real trouble in city X that you may not have experienced operator in city Y, which is your current single location.
Yeah, that's one thing that comes in, which if you're not prioritizing operations in the beginning, then it hits you sooner than you think. In that sense, what would be, and this is across industry, right? So be it charging infrastructure, be it any other operations or any other project, how would you go about developing like a procedure for them, like a workflow? How should they, what should they do if something goes wrong? Because this is important, and especially in shared mobility, we have, and I'm sure from the EV charging side too, we have a lot of new people coming into the industry, and they are like, tell me what to do and I'll do it, kind of a mentality, right? So we need to have these things ready to go, and we need to have these things ready for them to understand easily, and to Nick's point and Kameale's point, like how does the customer feedback flow go back, and then what should they do? What should be the priority, and how should they, go about troubleshooting things? So how would you rate that aspect, and how would you put that in place, and what would your advice be for operators in that sense?
I think for us, I think it's choosing a lane and sticking to it. One of the things that I saw come out of our industry was, and probably, this to Nick's point, I'm all on Nick's side. To Nick's point, right, with the feedback loop, is that so many RFPs came out and expected network providers to be one-stop shops when they were software companies. They didn't have project managers or construction workers or electrical contractors. These RFPs force software companies to be every single thing. Instead of maybe like the utilities starting off with the software companies are getting a better understanding of the industry, or I don't know, talking to the drivers of what they wanted to see, or even to the localities, and maybe the localities could have did the infrastructure builds, and the software companies could have been software companies. So learning from all of that, I would say that there's these new folks entering in the playing field. Like, either you're going to develop software, or you're going to do manufacturing, or you're going to be a project management firm. It is extremely hard to do all three and to do it well. It's expensive because you got to find people who are well qualified to deploy stations. And I say that just from experience. I was director of programs at my last software company. So my team, we led all the infrastructure build out for Electrify America, NIPA, NYSERDA. I did infrastructure build in Australia. And we had to stand up a PMO, a project management office, because we were a software company that was attempting to do everything. But the good thing at that company is that we were able to do it. But I think with the new folks, like, you don't have to go through those pain points. Like, just stick to something, have your lane. And the last thing I say is, like, for ChargerHelp, like, literally all we do is fix stations. I don't install stations. I don't do nothing else with the stations. I just fix them. That's all I want to do. I don't want to project manage. I don't want to resell you a unit. I just want to fix your station. But that then allows me to create operational processes that are lean, right? And then it allows me to learn and tweak things because I don't have 50 different steps I got to tweak. We do 3 things. We dispatch, we troubleshoot, we send data back. That's it. Nick, don't contradict me. I said some good things about you just now.
No, I can't contradict you on that one. Like, I have to agree. Like, there's no other option. No, like to the point, like the ability to have ownership of something, like true ownership, and have a team that is both empowered and then confident in what they're doing, and not splitting them up and having them, try to, hey, I need you to write a press release. It's like, well, I'm an operator. Like, I'll do my best, but that's really important. And like for building process and like a process house or best practices or SOPs, like I really like Google Docs or like a shared document generally, right? Like this should be a living document. And the folks that are on your team, that you're doing exactly what you just said. They're staying in their lane. They're focused on what they're doing, and they're confident in what they're doing. They should be adding things to this and taking things away and adjusting all the time, and really thinking about everything that they're getting in terms of inputs and creating outputs for those things. And so, yes, you can copy paste a process house or an SOP that worked at another operator's thing. And if you're going to a client that's totally brand new and is saying, just give me the thing and I'll run it, that's great. But you also have to make sure that they're empowered and they understand the importance of understanding their customer and what differentiates their product and like how they need to think differently about those things, and then letting them edit in line. I think a lot of times what happens is like things are set in stone and folks are running in that direction, and there's not this process of like stopping the assembly line, right? Like where if something's wrong, then every single person on that team that is understanding of what's actually happening, not just a random passerby, should be able to stop that production line and say, hey, like we need an immediate fix. And this is the plus one to what I was talking about previously, is that, I think you can send operators out there frontline battlers and just tell them what to do at first. I think that's okay. But if you're not then listening to them and making those changes and figuring out solutions to the real world problems and actually stopping the assembly line when necessary, then you're doing something wrong. So I think it's that balance of copy pasting, but doing it in a Google Doc where everyone can make edits, right?
Is there one area that you could point out and say that this was my biggest operational challenge so far that I faced? We'll start with you, Nick, and then maybe Kameale, you have a go at it.
Yeah, it's hard. I think both of us as operators are going to have like a billion to pick from, and it's going to be hard to narrow it
I
down,
was
right?
like, does
Like if you,
anything ever go well? Like,
yeah, yeah, like every week there's a new one, right? Like I mean, I'll give one that I think is a good example for the car sharing world or shared mobility generally. Is like I used to joke that literally I would get 10 LinkedIn messages a month from folks that had figured it out from a technology side exactly how to optimize my fleet. And they could tell me exactly where on our home area to put that car or to put that piece of charging infrastructure or whatever, with an exact GPS coordinates to the 1 millionth point or whatever, right? Um, and there were folks building these products seemingly at like every incubator across the country, and they were all very excited. But very few also had the solution for how to actually operationalize this thing. Like if you have Calgary is a great example for shared mobility. It's a breathing city, right? Cars come in the morning, they kind of rumble around a little bit, and then they go out in the afternoon. And then they stay there. And like, so how are you solving for that with software telling you where to put of course I know where to put the cars, but I can't get 500 people to come and bring those cars in. And I think there's companies that have done an okay job and even a good job of like combining these two things. And that to me was always the biggest struggle is like, how do we figure out a way to combine these two things where we have real good tools that our operators can use. But then there's also some reality kind of integrated into that tool to tell me like what is and is not possible. There's a company in Europe. They used to be called Park Bob. I actually forget their current name. They'll be mad at me, but like they kind of did it, and it was through crowdsourcing effectively people to move cars and get incentivized to do that. And I know companies like Gig and some other free-floating car share companies still in North America are building this into their own software, free to move, et cetera. So like that was like always a big one to me and a very frustrating one because there was so much over here and so little attention to over here. And so you'd always have to like kind of fight these folks off while telling them like, look, I get it, I hear you, but I'd like to do something about it too.
Yeah, the typical fight between a CIO and a COO.
so for us, like we are, I feel like everything we're doing right now is hard. So we have this crazy ideal that I can take, people that have no type of experience in our industry or no type of experience around just like clean tech, and I can get them to be the most successful EV charge station maintenance technicians in the world. And so we've taken a bet on 22 people across 8 states, and we've developed out technology in order to figure out a way to bridge the knowledge gap. And so one of like the hardest things with that is looking at so many different skill sets and really trying to identify the best skill sets for this industry. So I know what doesn't work, right? With EV charging stations, when we have issues with the stations, most of the time our customers don't know what's wrong, right? The first thing that an EV charge station network provider would tell you is to cycle the breakers, turn the computer off, turn it back on, and we're going to hope that whatever was wrong is going to figure itself out. And so crazy ideal. I don't think that's going to last forever. I don't think that's a way to do mass adoption. So I've been trying to figure out, like, how do I help my customers, network providers, better figure out how to maintain their stations. And so the good thing with level 2s today is that they'll just swap them out. But DC fast chargers, you can't just swap them out. You really need someone on the other end to honestly do Q&A with your network operations center on the phone. And so what we've been trying to do is, how do we identify the skill sets that are going to be transferable from folks without the industry, get them plugged in and create the right software that enables them to be great. And so far, it has been difficult because we're just we're figuring out as we go. We've been great to get a lot of contracts, so I'll let you know if it was a failure or not in 3 months or so. But so far, it's been a good problem to have. And I think like that's the thing, we were kind of joking earlier. It's just like what is not difficult. But I think overall, the cool thing about being an operator and with operations and processes is that you don't do it because it's easy. You do it because you're consistently learning, right? And you're learning how to tweak things and change things. And that's why it's never going to be perfect. Because when it is perfect, to Nick's point, when you have something that isn't getting any feedback, then that's when you think it's perfect, but then there's probably ways to improve and probably ways to optimize. So you don't ever get to a point where it's easy. But that's the cool part about it.
How would you balance incentivizing versus creating a new workflow? Like trying to push the same workflow or the same thing that has been designed and then just incentivize it so that maybe the operations team is more motivated to do that better, or figure out that, okay, this was broken, clearly nothing's working, we need to change the workflow. How do you balance that out? Anybody?
Yeah, I can jump in first. So, like personally, I tend to think more about new workflows, new processes, and maybe over-index a bit towards that, right? Like if I'm seeing actual human beings struggle with a problem, and I know there could be a better solution, like I really want to do that calculation in my head of even if it's fixed resources, where we're saying, look, the average hourly rate is X, and the number of extra hours spent on this problem is Y, and that equals Z number of dollars per month that we're spending on not thinking up this new process that I know will reduce that to zero, or what, whatever that equation looks like, and really have an honest look in the mirror about why we're doing that, right? And like at what point are we not thinking strategically long term and thinking so short term about each individual problem that we're ultimately going to encounter some problems in the long run. And I think shared mobility groups have struggled with this, right? It's like you're just going and you're just trying to kind of cobble things together as best you can and figure out the problems as they come up, and you're not willing to step back and again, kind of develop that new process or think of that new workflow, or otherwise even do the assessment, right? And this is a big one that really frustrates me, is where there will be folks where you try to do this assessment and you say, look, this is costing an extra $3,000 a month, and like that doesn't compute because it's not really P&L expense, like it's not a cost center, right? It's like it's fixed resources, so it's hard to really make that calculation. But yeah, I'm always looking at the new thing, maybe to my detriment, in that it gets me frustrated, right? Because you can't always do that. But like I'm always thinking I wish I could, and as a result, probably causing myself to lose sleep more often than I should when thinking about some of these problems. But that's the quick reply. I think there's probably a balance somewhere to this direction of where I am, just personally.
Yeah, I like that. X minus Y equals Z. Try to reduce Z. Try to see how big that is, and then decide whether you create a new workflow or just deal with it. Kameale, what's your take on that?
So I think a little bit a different viewpoint. So actually three things. For me, it's really knowing who I'm hiring. So I really try to hire goal-oriented people, and that we can detect that, because I'm a goal-oriented person. And usually with folks that are goal-oriented, that already is a motivation. Because for us, we have a scorecard. So we track literally 3 metrics across our whole entire industry. It's the only 3 things that I track, because those 3 things bubble up to everything. So one of those metrics are off. That means that something in line here is off. And I think creating a standard tracking system, having folks that are goal-oriented, so when they start seeing that something isn't happening, it's an indicator to the entire organization, right? Because these 3 goals touch from our SLAs. So one goal has to do around how quick we're getting on site. A goal has to do with how fast we're getting paid. And then our last goal is our customer, your net promoter score. So if any of those things start tracking oddly, it's going to touch somebody in the organization. If you have goal-oriented people, they're going to be self-motivated to start figuring out how do we adjust this, right? And then the last part that I think, which is the most important, which I'm learning a lot from my co-founder, is having and knowing who the leaders are and letting people know who the leaders are. Because sometimes when you have too many motivated people, and especially with process-oriented people, everybody going to have some type of opinion of what the process of change could be. But for us, we're very much so like your manager is in charge of y'all hitting this goal. Your manager is in charge of receiving feedback from you, but at the end of the day, it's your manager's job to do the whatever the tweaking on that process, and that bubbles up, right? And so I think for us, like I really tried to lean into this ideal of being lean, focusing on 3 goals that identifies, pain points in the entire organization. So we're always looking at it. So it's not a matter of doing assessment. It's just a thing that we talk about every single meeting, from board meetings to manager meetings, from team meetings. And then making sure that you have the leaders that when we say we are going to change this process, people are going to buy in because they're goal-oriented, so they're fed that way, and then they trust their leader.
We are at the end of our session this time, but what a fun session this was. Thank you both, Nick and Kameale. If I had to give like a one-liner about what we spoke about today was we spoke about how operations planning is important initially, but at the same time, it's as important to get the customer feedback loop and provide that ear or that priority, number one, once stuff start on the ground. So then operations has to have the con, and they need to have that button to stop the assembly line, so to speak, and fix it. Maybe not stop it. And then stick to your lane. So choose for the operators. It's about choosing a specific expertise and then sticking to it, because shared mobility is all about partnerships. You can look at people who are experts in that field before you get into that. So get your stuff done first. Be an expert in that before you move on to that. That would be helpful in an operational way. And then tech only helps solve so much. Everything else is about people. And that's where it's about deciding how much you would put your team under stress, whether be it, if everybody is a leader, you also need a follower, and you need the team to work cohesively together. And at the same time decide, that my favorite equation now, x minus y equals z, and decide whether the z is big enough for you to create a new workflow or just quell it with some incentivizing or, makeshift kind of an arrangement, depending on whether it's a long-term or a short-term gain.